Today, we have an exciting presentation by two different groups. It's Big Ideas. We're starting with Chris Purifoy and Taylor Kendall. They're going to lead a discussion that some of you have already heard, but we're looking really to challenge some of these ideas and to introduce big new developments in each of the areas around the guiding principles of the Internet of Education. Soon there's going to be a chance for people to sign on to this, and so now it's time to refresh these ideas and come back to them. Then we're going to spend the bulk of the meeting today on the IoE conceptual model. Jerry Gordon and Jim Goodell are going to develop here, a working session, the common conceptual model that from which the logical component framework will evolve. So it's a big, exciting session, and welcome.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. And is there anyone else who's not been on this call before who would like to introduce themselves? I think everyone else has been here before. So, Chris, Taylor, do you want to kind of take it away and talk about the principles and how? I mean, just one introduction, which is when I was on the EDCI call last week, I specifically asked Anthony what he thought about the 10 Internet of Education principles and whether they formed a foundation for Europe-US collaboration. And he said he didn't want to speak for the EU, et cetera, but that he thought, yes, that they were an excellent framework to begin the collaboration. And I think that's the intent, right, Chris, is to ground us first in our values before we get into the type of conceptual and logical and physical technical specifications that Jerry's going to take us into.
No, that's exactly right. It's interesting. I've been doing this for a while, and when you look back and see where we've come, it's pretty remarkable. We have, and as you see, I'm calling in from Georgetown Lake here. So this is a true fireside chat. I got out of DC for the time being to have a working space up in the mountains for a couple of weeks. But I'll tell you what, it's remarkable what we've been able to do. When you look back over the past 10 years, there's been a culmination of just passion and really hard work and, out of the box thinking, and also really diligent, red tape, cutting. And we've come a long way, and, a year ago, we started calling this thing the Internet of Education, which, kind of, and all of that effort combined into a delegation at Davos where we first coined this thing, and we got some good support and began to understand what this could be. And it's been kind of remarkable what's happened since then, That was in January where we first officially put a name to this thing that we've been working on. And now look forward a year to where we are. And we have ecosystems growing all over the world, across the state of Colorado, across Florida, North Dakota, and British Columbia, and, the whole of Asia Pacific, many, many countries across the Asia Pacific. And we have organizations like, like NGOs and, governments and, Fortune 500s. And, it's just become such a groundswell, right? And we're just honored by that. I mean, it's remarkable. And I think, to Greg's credit, he's been able to keep this ship afloat constantly. And I know that there's, so many folks who have made this possible. It certainly isn't one person. And that's, I think, why the principles are so critical, right? Because the principles provide for us a common shared agreement, right? These are the same kind of organizing principles that allow, robust democracies to thrive, right? And global currencies to form trillions of dollars in value. Right. This is simply because of an agreement, and, if you think about it, shared agreement and collective action really are the fuel, of impact. It's the fuel and the spark of impact. And so, really we have put these, these principles together as a way to be a bit of a declaration of independence, if you will, for what is this new education and employment internet eco city, if you will, right? You know, it's an organizing principle that will kind of, you know, frame the culture and the ethos of this new, you know, future, and, you know, where we all believe can be a better place, you know, for the learners and the employees that are centered around them. And, you know, in November, we will be, I like that. Dan says, a declaration of existence, you know, yeah, here to that. And, you know, we've come a long way. You know, many of you who have been on this call and, you know, have been involved in our network have helped us and debated through these. You know, we first had the conversation about these when we launched the Education 3.0 a research network officially in January, which was after, you know, another like a year before of workshopping. And they've come a long way since then. We've had great debate and great discussion. And we still have time for discussion. So let's continue that. But on November 17th, we'll be kind of launching an official signatory and inviting, you know, people, organizations around the world to join and say, hey, this makes sense, which really becomes the foundation, if you will, the seed, if you will, for this new implementation space that we're moving into. And so that'll be on November 17th. We'll be doing a joint announcement. You know, you can, you know, if you go to the internetofeducation.org, you can learn more about the principles. I think we're going to walk through them a little bit today. And you can also, you know, sign up for the pre-signatory and subscribe so you make sure you're involved in that joint announcement. But you'll be hearing more from us if, you know, next week as we begin to build towards that joint announcement. But the idea and the hope is that as of November 17th, we can start to get, you know, alignment. You know, it's a very kind of, you know, what we like to call a weak center, right? The idea here is not, you know, to govern anyone yet with anything. The idea is to align around shared agreement and common principles so that all of these ecosystems that are forming, which are forming, again, in cities, states, and nations all around the world, can start to have aligned principles as to why we're doing this and where we're going with it. And so, you know, and again, we could talk all day about the why of this, right? We all, you know, I think a lot of the people who are on this call understand, but, you know, for those of you who are kind of new to it, you know, it's because if a learner and employee can compile all their own credentials and achievements on their own device, then you can gamify success and abundance. You know, so we can really start to solve really impossible equity challenges, right? We can measurably solve skills gaps, right? Governments and institutions can maximize their investments and minimize the waste in human capital. And, you know, and people around the world can have access to a GPS to measurably and, you know, efficiently navigate themselves through the value centers of education and employment to reach their goals, right? And this happens whenever we, you know, decentralize education and employment, when we create a data trust that allows for innovation to thrive without sacrificing privacy or intellectual property. And, you know, some of these great new technologies allow that to happen. So it's a really exciting time, and you know, we have so much support already from, you know, major organizations around the world. So really the idea here is, you know, I think we're going to go through them once more just to kind of say, here they are. You know, if anyone has any final thoughts on them, please get them in and let us know. And then just encourage you and invite you to be involved in the signatory that launches on November 17th. And we'll definitely keep you in the loop as we head towards that.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add. And Greg, you're on mute. I know we can bounce. Chris might need to stoke the fire. It sounds like you've got a little oxygen finding its way into the wood behind you potentially. We're getting the crackles.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, I think I don't have a whole lot to add. If we want to just jump in, I think it'd be fun to just kind of dive and dissect a little bit, and maybe folks push back where it makes sense, and we can open it up to everybody at that point.
Yeah, so Taylor, why don't you bring them up and share them, or Chris, okay. And, you know, Robbie, I'm looking at you. I've never seen a thing that you accept on face value, right? So tear it apart. Tell us why, or, you know, tell Taylor and Chris why these are not right, or how they could be improved, or right, like just, and I'm not saying this in an authentic way of like critical.
I understand.
Right?
Yeah, there's a couple things that I saw that, but maybe we should just go through them one at a time. And this is from, I'm looking at this not from the perspective, my own personal perspective, but more the perspective of the goal. If in fact the goal is including interfacing with industry, and you know, and also interfacing internationally, where there are a variety of laws and things. So if we if we go down, so number one, there is only one open internet. So I'm not sure. First of all, I don't understand exactly what that means. Okay. I mean,
Well,
that's like, so
let's talk about it.
yeah.
So yeah, why don't we just start at the beginning and then let's have a discussion. And we invite that. This is really what we need. This first principle is based on the idea that there's only one internet. There are many networks inside of that internet, but the idea here is that, and that's why we're working with W3C and IEEE. The idea here is let's create some open standards so that we can have one internet to share with many networks inside of it. The idea is, we don't want to have a bunch of different efforts competing to try to launch an internet of education together. We need to have one open standards, internet of education that all of the networks can find and plot their own space inside of.
Yeah, I mean, that all may, as I said, personally, that's fine. I would ask Richard, who's on the call, how that's going to be interpreted in China, for example.
Yeah. Richard, is there one internet that's China and the US, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think in terms of principles, that's not me. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of the internet, I do agree that there is only one internet, even though there are certain restrictions. Like, for example, like if you look at each country may have differences in terms of how they control, like personal data, privacy, or other type of sensitive information, right? Some of the, like for example, in China, if you are creating an app for the education arena, then there's no way that you can add any ad to it, right? So the advertisement for all the internet-based apps is prohibited if you have advertisement, and then you cannot go into school, right? So those are the type of thing that I think is idiosyncratic across many different jurisdictions and cultural background, right? So I do feel like, but in principle, when we're talking about these, for this particular organization we're talking about, I feel like this is a principle that we should adhere to, is that we have open and also I would say, cohesive and comprehensive way of describing all the different technologies and the different pieces, especially around learning record and so forth, right?
Yeah, so Richard, I agree with you completely. But my question really is different. It says we will work together to protect the web from abuse and ensure it. It and the IoE equitably benefits humanity. And my question is whether that sentence, and it may be okay if it does, but my question is how, you obviously can't represent the Chinese government or anything like that, but my concern would be that in certain parts of the country, and IEEE deals with these as well. It's not just China; it's also other parts of the country, Middle East as well, that they would view that as a political statement that would be completely unacceptable to anybody, to them. I'm just pointing that out. I'm not, as I said, I agree with the principle, but I just want to make sure that, that we understand that, and that there may be, and I'm not an expert in this area, that was just bringing up the point.
And part of this process, obviously, is to have these discussions. I know we've had this up for quite a while, and I get it. It's a matter of time in the day, and where should our investment be is going and debating this first principle really where we need to spend time.
No, totally I'm not saying that, but you asked me to point out some things that I saw. So
No, and I'm saying that is still an option. We'd love for you to seed that sort of discussion. And so that's still an option for sure.
Yeah.
Taylor,
it is.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Daniel's note in the chat, and I think that I was going to also say that perhaps you can flip the language to be in the positive tone, and it makes it a lot less, it kind of neutralizes it a little bit, and it could make it potentially less concerning as a political statement to others. So it's not to erase the principle, but it's to wordsmith the language underneath it to be a little bit more universally acceptable.
Okay, so let's keep going. I think that,
let's keep going. Yeah, let's
Before
keep
we move on,
I think there should be
the
modification based on that, right? I think, Taylor, you're hearing a substance there that we want to make sure we capture, and then it's reflected into the final version.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I want to say, this is not, this is all of us. That's it's not looking to us to make specific changes. I mean, this is a shared set of principles that if we, can come to agreement, that's good. If we can't, we've got more work to do.
Right, but
anyway, so I want to make sure that
it's your guys, you guys are running the website, right? So like practically, if
Sure.
there's a change in wording, it's going to come to you guys actually changing the words, right? So
Sure. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, let's continue.
I think this is great. I think redoing the words on this is exactly right. I think, and I will say, just for everyone's knowledge, this button right here, on each of these, there is a place to go and actually have debate about these and put in these comments. So each one of them has a button. So there is a place to do that. So please use that. We encourage you asynchronously between now and November 17th to click this button, go in there and actually, have a discussion about these. But absolutely, we will take that note. I think, Dan, you're right on. So let's move on to the second one.
Okay,
well,
so
actually, if we don't mind, jump to number 5, and then we'll go back to 2, because I think in some ways what I just put in the chat is that I kind of feel like the flow of it would be a little bit better if we went 1 and then this one here, because it's sort of it's the corollary in my mind, which is there is no company called the internet, right? What's so powerful about the internet is that there's a weak center, that there's opportunity for everyone, right? And I think that in some ways it would flow better if we were to go 1 internet and then weak center and then open standards, because if there's weak center, then what's important are the standards, because there isn't going to be one company that's going to run this internet of this network of networks.
right. So I mean, I don't have. I mean, this is a. I think part of the things that are coming in the chat are, it's part of the language is like we commit to ensure. So first of all, you can't really ensure anything. I mean, it's not, I mean, there's no way to actually ensure it. And so, and these are principles. And so, in some sense, I'd almost think that, we believe that or something like that no one organization should, or like the early visions of the internet, or this should be modeled after it, where no one organization asserts. And I'm just saying these kinds of bizarre wordsmithing because there are certain words, and this is just from my background in standards, that we try to avoid the word ensure, because you can't ensure anything. I mean, that's a legal thing and an enforcement thing. It's a policing thing. So we can't commit to police anything.
Lisa Shaw raises a good question, which is, I think, going to help frame all this discussion. Who is the intended target audience for this language, the overall verbiage?
And this is supposed to be everyone, right? I mean, this is something that literally you should be able to, show. Well, I guess anyone who can access in English right now, but it should be literally anyone should be able to look at these and say, yes, I agree with these, and so I want to learn more about the Internet of Education. This is the values that I have. So it should be a technical person, a non-technical person, a student, a teacher, a government official.
And maybe in this case, it's just good enough to say that you support the Presidio principles and leave it at that, because then you're referring to something and you don't need to make an enforcement commitment. Okay, anyway, those are, you asked for comments, I'm just making comments.
That's exactly what you're doing. This is exactly what we need. To be honest, we haven't got this much, robust feedback in a while. So this is specifically what we wanted. So thank you.
And
should we go back up and keep going?
Yeah.
I was going to mention
there's one internet, and then there's weak center, and so therefore open standards.
Right. Yeah, and open stand is, again, you're referencing something, so I don't have a problem with that. I think open stand is pretty clear. And once again, you're referencing something else. Now, do be aware that there are many organizations, and I personally think this is the right thing to do, but many organizations would not agree that things should be necessarily defined by the market, or that there's certain principles in here that are followed. So I have no problem with this whatsoever. But I think this is the right way to do things, is to reference sort of accepted principles elsewhere.
Yeah, and real quick, I was going to mention within the app as well, that these sort of comment boxes link off to. There's also an option to submit it entirely new. If something just doesn't feel like it flows or fits within these existing 10, there's space there to actually suggest. And Kimberly, who's here, thank you. You've already submitted I think a really useful possible addition. So that's an option as well.
Right. But for example, the balance part of the open standards principles, I would argue, are not followed by many consortia. Okay, in many industries.
Yep.
So okay, so let's continue.
Yeah. And note once again the beautiful graphical treatment from Learning Economy Foundation.
I think it's really attractive, actually. That okay.
Kimberly raised a really good point, which was that we don't say, "Oh, we do now." Okay, good. Learner. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So number 3 is interesting, and this one is, I think, more the crux of everything than anything else, and that's because what do you mean when you say learner records are owned or controlled by the individual? So in many countries, for their government records, many institutions, including educational institutions in Western countries, and certainly in the corporate world, this is a very unclear thing. So when you say the record, so let me give you a concrete example. So supposing that a company issues I guess it depends on what's in a learner record, but supposing that issues some sort of certification, or somebody claims that they have done something, and the evidence for that is let's say an email or a presentation or a document that they produced while an employee of Acme Corporation, some generic corporation. Typically the employment agreement will have that document is owned by the corporation. If that's part of the record, this is a problem. So whereas again, as a personally, I completely support the idea of self-sovereignty, and in fact many of the organizations that are looking at talent pipeline development, at least in the United States, are include self-sovereignty as a principle. But without defining what you mean by the learner record, and what you mean by controlling it as well, by the way, that's a problem. So for example, someone in the military, absolutely their learner record is not theirs, and cannot be for many reasons in just about any country I think represented on this call, can't be released and as part of in its original form, or that references something that was classified, or that might be a threat to national security or whatever. I mean, there are all these kinds of cases. And so I think that this needs to be thought about very carefully as to what you really mean here and what you're trying to accomplish, because although I think it's correct, there's all of these other use cases that are going to get in the way.
There's two things I think people, want to say is that, like, there's often two copies of the record. The issuer owns a copy of the record, and the learner owns a copy of that same record, right? So that's part of what needs to be captured. And then the second thing is that in some cases, you just said as the military, it may be that the learner doesn't even own that record. So we want to just write it in a way that is appropriate.
So, but it says all learner records here.
Yep. So we need to put some caveats in, or like where appropriate or where possible, or that type of caveat might make it more accurate, right?
Yeah, maybe in general, and instead of calling them hard principles, call them heuristics. Which is if you get the choice, you tend towards this, but obviously it's going to be impossible to come up with a fully comprehensive list of constraints for everybody who may ever do one of these things. But I think that's really the message that we're trying to say, is that if you have the choice, you want to go as far in this direction as you can, given the constraints of your particular circumstances.
Yeah, I think that.
Keep going, because I do want to make sure that Jerry has time as well. Sorry, Robbie, but if we can get through the other 7, just at least to stoke people's imagination. Sure. Sorry, Robbie, I didn't mean to interrupt though.
Yeah. I mean, this one is really interesting, and I see Mackie is pointing out things, and there's a lot of thought that's been given to this by other organizations and so forth. And I mean, this is one that I think needs to be discussed in this community and more broadly, because I think what we're trying to say, and is that you should have a right over who sees your record, and you should have the right to, for example, redact your record. You should have the right to not transmit it, to not make it public if you want, all those kinds of rights, which are self-sovereignty. But that's different than saying that you control what's in it. And I think that's, it's what other people see that's in it. And I think that this is something that needs to be understood more carefully.
Awesome. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, I agree. And I will also say, one thing we always learn, and it comes up over and over, is that the word ownership in general is just tricky, and it probably should go away, because it's really not about ownership. It's more about control and access.
Yeah.
It's about curation, and is more than ownership, because any issuer actually owns the thing that they're standing behind. And that's, they're the ones doing the issuing. They're the ones that are putting their reputation and the like on the line that says this person has achieved something. And here's how we verified that.
I think there's also a right to contest, so to speak, or to deny, or to protest or whatever, just like the right to be forgotten. So there's a lot of things that go into this, which is tricky. Okay, I'm sorry.
I mean, there's one more thing just on this, because from a FERPA standpoint in the US, right, you don't have a right to your record. You have a right to inspect your record, not access the official record if you haven't paid your bill. Now, I think that's bad, right? I think that a student should have access to their record even if they haven't paid their tuition bill, that it should be treated as their data. But that the current law in the US is that you have a right to inspect your record, but not to get the actual official record.
And I want to also bring up the fact that we have self-asserted data, right? It's not necessarily always something that is an organization that's asserting, but we can go out and write a Medium article or whatever we want to publish on the internet that's our thought, right? And it's our thought, and we have to endorse it ourselves and prove that we're the original producer of the thought. And so that's something that there is learner data or experiential data that we own and control, but some that we don't own. We just curate, like what Phil said.
This next one.
Go ahead. What does this mean?
This one is the most mushy, I think, right? This one, it's hard to say what this one means.
Yeah, and for that reason, I mean, I think so. I mean, so for example, just going back to some of my IEEE background, the mission of the IEEE is to advance technology for the benefit of humanity. Period. Okay, and I would highly suggest putting something in here that say that we will develop, adopt, and promote technologies and practices for the benefit of humanity. Period. And that I think that makes the statement. Without going into what's good and what's bad, because what you think is good, I may think is bad. I mean, I don't, that we come from different places, maybe.
Good. I keep going 4 or 5, and then right, we already talked about 5, I think. So we can go to 6.
Yeah. So proactively advocate for the support of historically disadvantaged groups. I mean, obviously, well, maybe not obviously. I personally support this. I don't. This will cause some, this is a political statement again, and I don't know that it's necessarily a bad one, but I think that there's a way to say this that maybe instead of saying is to put it positively, as somebody suggested on something else before, instead of to advocate for historically disadvantaged groups is to, and I don't know what the right wording is to state it positively that that we want to benefit all groups without disadvantaging any, which is a very different.
You should look at 8, right? Because I think that the language under 6 really belongs under 8. And, Dan Goal and others can talk about equity. Equity is more than, if you just scroll down to 8 so people see it, right? This reads more like diversity and inclusion rather than equity. Equity really has a different focus and meaning.
Correct. Yeah, equity is not is not explicitly or implicitly disadvantaging any group. Period. That's sir.
Show 8, just so people can see that at the same time.
7 or 8. Okay.
Yep, 8. So 8, diversity and inclusion. That's really about inclusion of historically disadvantaged groups in order to have better representation, right? I think equity is about providing the Dan, I'm gonna put you on the spot, Dan. Give us the definition of equity. It's always hard.
I'll give you an opinion here, right?
Yeah.
Equity is distinguished from diversity and inclusion. Diversity is the acknowledgement of difference and the assurance that we respect differences without existential value judgments. Inclusion is making sure that across those metrics of diversity, we are having the presence of that diversity. Equity is different. Equity is a measure of resource allocation, of opportunity, and output measures that shows that none of the attributes around diversity have produced disproportionate outcomes. And so sometimes resources are disproportionately deployed in order to ensure that the inheritance of previous forms of inequity are able to be addressed in contemporaneous dynamics. So equity is about having none of the diversity attributes drive the outcomes or opportunities.
This picture, right? This is like the classic picture that people talk about with equity, right? Equality, everyone's getting the same thing, but this kid can't see, right? Equity is giving this kid 2 boxes so that everyone gets to see.
Yeah. So one of the things that also I'll just bring up as you said this, is you mentioned fairness and bias. And one of the things that we have to be aware of is that there's a great deal of concern for the introduction of unfairness and bias in through technology, in particular through artificial intelligence, and and that I think that I think Dan, I didn't write it down or anything. I think Dan gave some good definitions of not of ensuring that whatever it is that's done here, the technology as well as the actions ensure whatever equal access, equal opportunity, and avoid introducing bias. But this needs to be. I think all those things make sense here. I just think it's yeah. So you've sort of gone through the difference. So I'll stop there.
So open participation, pretty straightforward.
Yeah, this is fine.
Yep. And then we just talked about diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
We want to finish up so we can get over to Jerry. Yep. Effectiveness, and just show us the last effectiveness and proportional influence, right? And Carrie's saying in the chat, equity doesn't always refer to what it just went away.
What are catalysts in 9?
It's another word for stewards, but with less, it's more about accelerating and versus the governing, I think.
Empower them to make prompt, clear, and well-communicated decisions. Yeah, I'm just trying to understand what that really means. I mean, does that mean that anybody that's participating in this can make a decision for everybody else, or I mean, what is it that's being tried to be said here? What's the concern here?
I know that catalyst is a very it's a change agent kind of word, but in this particular, in number 9 particularly, we're really talking about efficiency and making things work well. And that's, I think steward actually might be a better word right there than catalysts. It's not about catalysts, it's about people who are managing and leading the data efforts rather than change agents, particularly, although those people might be change agents. I'm just saying catalyst might not be the right noun to put there.
It's interesting, just to, I know we're moving on here, but that word catalyst and steward, it's been a funny thing because we call ourselves stewards, and there's been those moments where people have been like, wait, that's has too much ownership in it. And we're like, well, that's not really, we're not trying to own anything. We're trying to be open. And so we ended up moving to Catalyst because there were little factions of people saying that Steward was too, but I do think you're right. I think Steward's the right word. Because I think what this is talking about is people who are actually implementing this. These are, local implementations. These are organizations. These are governments. These are people that are taking these technologies, putting it into action. The idea here is let's just make sure that, they have what they need to do that, I think.
Okay, so I think this was good, right? I mean, definitely you got good feedback there. I think people could go in, write comments, write directly to Taylor and Chris if you want to talk more holistically. And then, these will get, there'll be some revision, and then on the 17th, we'll go through, it'll be the next round of things. Okay, so I wanted to introduce, if it's okay, Chris, is that all right?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so I want to introduce, Jim and Jerry, and this is really going to be next week we'll be back in IEEE formal protocol. And so it won't be recorded and shared, which Robbie, by the way, still, very much object to. So I don't know if there's any opportunity still to get IEEE to change its policy. Let us record, transcribe, and share to get more open participation. But we can't do that yet. So we're still in WebEx. We will not be sharing the recording. The conceptual model is moved from Friday to Thursday. So Jim and Jerry, I'm just going to quickly go through what I heard when we met yesterday, and then turn it over to you guys. So this is the picture that you guys all have been familiar with. This is what we have now in the ILR framework, and this is what we looked at from this one was from EBSI, from Europe. And so we saw, well, look, the issuer, holder, receiver, and we see that same triangle. And isn't that interesting that there's this common alignment? So then what happened Wednesday is that Jim and I talked a little bit more about SEDS. And now it's a little bit different. It's, 3 circles, so interesting 3 circles and 3 circles. This is more of a data classification schema. And and what's central to what we've been doing for 20 years together with CEDS is noting that people are not students or teachers. People have roles of teacher and student in organizations at specific time, right? And that relationship is really important when you do data management, is to note same person could be a teacher there, a student there, and a parent there, 3 different organizations, maybe the same organization. So we started talking a little bit about resources. And so at first we just sort of put it at the top left there. Well, resources, they're not really in this picture. So maybe we should be thinking about resources, just add them to this picture, and then Jerry started saying, well, actually, he's like, well, where's the skills registry? He says, oh, well, that's in the center. He said, well, where's the credential registry? That's not really there. And Jerry said, well, there's 5 types of registries that need to be there. Oh, well, maybe we should just then simplify a little bit and say that this bottom circle is where these 5 different types of shared registries are. And that's both simpler and more extensible. And then I just added this line saying, so in some ways you can sort of think of learning happening on the left side and then the talent pipeline on the right side, and both the learning ecosystem and talent pipeline ecosystem share these common registries that each have their own governance framework. And so maybe that, sort of sticking them underneath the European picture and talking about that, where kind of interesting that in some ways, what we learned from it seems like Europe is much more centrally coordinated, right? Not surprising, and so there's much more of a focus on the accredited institutions. And, in the US, we know that there's a lot of more complexity potentially going on in terms of institutions. And so that's why these registries become even more important. And then that all leads us back to ILR and these 8 components that we want to be expanding in ILR. But Jerry, Jim, do you want to take it from here of how do we land this ILR work and the rest of the LTSC work in one common conceptual logical model?
Jim, do you want to start or do you want me to?
I'll throw out an opinion and then let you run from there. And my opinion is that this starting from this view, for this group, that we tend to be focused on the
Credentials.
the credential kind of space, the talent pipeline, and the assertion of competence. This works. There may be some other parts of the learning technology standards ecosystem that need to come at it from a different lens. And so maybe there are some things, like I don't see where a standard for augmented reality yet fits into this. Maybe it's there, but it's a theory that we may need to have more than one entry point.
Yep. Professor
Okay.
Jerry.
Sure, I'm gonna actually share a tutorial. It's a couple slides out of a tutorial that I'm going to be giving at the International Industry Training Simulation Engineering Conference, or virtual version of it, that it's coming up here in the next couple of weeks. So we're actually in the process of doing the recordings now. So you guys are getting the early bird look at this. But part of the research that I was doing when I was at ADL was on a thing called the Total Learning Architecture, which was the DoD's conception of what this learning ecosystem would look like. Now, with the caveat that there are a couple of changes, and Greg alluded to them. Things like the identity is a little bit more centrally managed, records are a little more centrally managed, but a lot of the same concepts apply. So one of the things that I had done early on, which I think is a big part of this conceptual model, is thinking about how all of the terms that we throw around sort of fit into the world, so we don't get an endless proliferation of ideas or interpretation of things. And a lot of it, I think, is really tied to particular perspectives. So technologists are usually coming into the world looking, from the technology out, whereas organizational people will be coming in looking from the organization down. And sometimes they use the same team to mean slightly different things. And so I think that's part of the thing that we need to attack within the conceptual model. And this was even at this point 6 months ago now, but you can kind of see where I was thinking with this. So what I had done was I had taken the SEDS model, the three balls, the data meta model there, and said, okay, if I'm looking from the organization down across these other two, what are the kinds of things that we hear time and again in the literature that apply here? And we kind of broke them out into three different groups: motivational focus, learning situations, and roles. And that for example, that person-organization relationship is really what ends up defining the roles here. And this includes an entire spectrum from the traditional classroom teacher-student, to colleagues, teammates, classmates, supervisors in the work environment, mentors, tutors. So it's all the different kinds of shades of meaning in the relationships between any two people that's really driven by an organizational focus. And similarly, the motivational focus is coming from, why are you doing this? Well, probably because you exist within some group of humans, formal or otherwise. So are you working towards a formal milestone that's been established as a particular career point in a formal organization, or a credential that's associated with that? Are you trying to get better at doing a particular job? Are you working towards an end-of-life skill? Or are you just trying to be a better cultural fit for an organization? These are all things that drive why you might learn something, but they're really from an organizational perspective. And this is where it seemed like the most natural home for separating out the differences between formal, informal, and non-formal learning. Similarly, for resources, there's a couple of different ways about thinking about the data that seem to fit in, from looking across this group of data from the resource perspective. The one that I wanted to point out here is that a lot of the legacy data structures use a thing called interactivity to split up why one particular learning experience is different from another, but we found that a little bit restrictive. And we started moving over to a thing we call cognitive alignment, which broadens out from just traditional e-learning products to anything from reading a book to doing a live OJT. So the idea is that there are certain aspects of doing the work in situ that are true, and then some of those are going to be replicated in any particular thing that you might be using to learn about it. And the degree of mating will tell you what this is actually evidence. When you've done something or you've comped out of something, what is the evidence actually telling you? Is it a, for example, flying a plane is a very psychomotor intensive skill, but it's also got cognitive aspects to it. So obviously throwing you in a real airplane or in front of a level 7 flight simulator is going to teach you all those psychomotor aspects. But that's not to say that doing other things isn't also useful. It's just useful for different cognitive aspects.
Hey, Jerry.
So, yeah.
I just want to interrupt for a second because in this group particularly, and maybe this is exactly what we're going to do next week is kind of go through this, but I want to just challenge you, Jim, and everyone here, like the what are we doing, right? What Jerry's talking about, it needs to start driving what the rest of us are doing, and it's not yet, right? Jerry's just talking about his model, right? And what we need to get to is how can we be like, okay, we're doing ILR work, we're doing assistive instruction work, right? All of different IEEE work we're doing. And we're going back to this and saying, okay, this is giving us what we need, the vocabulary that we need in order to see how our work group and another work group connects together. So that's what I think is not happening quite yet, right? And I'm not sure the right way to do that, right? What we don't want is a conceptual model that sits on its own, abstracted from every other group. Useless. No point in doing that. We're wasting our time. What we do want is a conceptual model that is the unifying model for all IEEE LTSC work, right? And in order for that to happen, we need to bridge the gap. So when you have interactivity, is this what Richard, is this what you're looking for? Is this Robbie, is this your model, right? Does this really become all of our model? Right?
I think one approach to that is to take the conceptual models that are the views from the different communities. So this community has that issuer, holder, and verifier based model. There's a conceptual model that's been developed for adaptive instructional systems, and there are other conceptual models that are standards in IEEE. If we take those different conceptual models, and if we can build the bridges between those models, that may be one way of doing this.
Yeah, and that's not taking.
Let me also interject a little bit here. Is that it's not. I mean, I think the purpose for both the conceptual model working group, right, the CM for LTS working group,
yep,
and also the work I think is done here. I think each one have its own purpose, right? I don't, I mean, personally, I feel like each standard working group has its own context, its own purposes, and so forth. It's very hard, I think I would say even impossible to say that everything will be kind of like a single model. I mean, I think that is it's a good intention, but I think that might not be the most effective or even practical way of going forward. I feel like, again, if we have something that between the two groups, right, between the CM4 LTS group and the LR group, if there are certain pieces, like for example, from Jerry's and Jim's work, that you guys think it could be, basically applied to giving like a high level, kind of like a bird's eye view of the LR stuff, I think that would be great. And you would say maybe the thing that when you define, the people in the three icons you have earlier, the issuer, for that group, and say, okay, that can be mapped to the person organization relationship that is, as is captured in the CM4 LTS group. And I think that would be great, right? I think, but that's pretty much it. But you don't have to basically say everything has to come from the same baseline there. That's just my opinion.
Well, I think a general thing that I think is useful in these kind of endeavors, and it's certainly something that we want to include, is a lot of it is, you're right, you can't create a universal language translator that will make everybody happy. I think a certain amount of it is can we agree on a minimal set of things that we are going to frame the same way? And then also have a way of saying, here's a line of demarcation. And when we're talking about it, we're going to do it this way. And then we can hand over our model to you guys, but you guys are necessarily going to have to do it a different way. And I think that just writing out where those boundaries are and what lives on those boundaries is an important portion of the conceptual model. Because you're right, you can't come up with something that's universally all-inclusive for all folks. You run into a Goodellian impossibility pretty fast.
So one thing I'll point out is that the most successful model of this type that people know about is the OSI model, and the reason that was and is so successful is that it defines where products are built. So if you're building a router, you know what layer of the network that's on. If you're building a web app, you know what layer of the network that's on. And and one way we might start thinking about this, because I agree, there's so many different of these models, and they run into different use cases with team training, and there's differences between roles and positions and all these kinds of things. And it may be worthwhile sort of rethinking this in terms of where what sort of where what happens is, and I don't know that that's that far from this, but at least that will help. It defines where products are. So if I say I'm a school, I know what layer I'm operating in. If I say I'm a learner, I know where I'm operating. If I say I have a learning management system, or I have a VR system, or something, I know where I am. And it may be multiple layers, of course, but that would help me understand that, and that starts having a real world application.
Yeah. Okay, we got 3 minutes left. So
yeah, I think with that 3 minutes, I want to talk to this one. This one, of course, is a little bit of a DoD flavor to the way that was drawn, but we actually started with we had an early meeting. I ended up having to push it back for an hour for a customer meeting, but that's since changed. So now we're back into the normal time slot. So we haven't been able to get a quorum yet, but we started out, and I brought some other folks that are outside of the Ed3D group into this, that were some other experts from the field that I used to work with. But we really started out with what do we mean when we say ecosystem? Because ecosystem has become a certain amount of a brand. The marketing slicks all say, look, we got an ecosystem. And I think that we want to define some major characteristics of that, but there is actually a certain amount of a taxonomy within. So a learning management system, for example, what I call capital LMS trademark, is a closed system. There are a number of initiatives out there that are called ecosystems, that are open systems, insofar as some of the learning they can point to is somebody else's website. But there's still a thing you have to buy and install. And then those are open systems, but they're still open, somewhat proprietary systems. And then there's what I call the open complex adaptive system, which is, I think, what we eventually want everything to be able to go to. And that's where the things that you buy are a lot less important than the standards and interfaces and relationships that you're establishing. So I think part of this is helping folks understand where exactly their solution might be within that spectrum, so they have a way of understanding a growth path or a migration path forward, because this isn't going to happen overnight. But just like anything else, out in the software world, everybody slaps the label agile on things, and a lot of them are really just using a waterfall where they changed all the names. So it's become a bit of a brand, and I think that we want to make sure that we help define what are we really talking about, but also to make it a little less scary to say this is a process, not an event.
Okay, so we're gonna end here, and then next week this is gonna be IEEE. My suggestion to you guys is be careful not to go. This is gonna be funny coming from me. Don't go too fast, right? Because if you can build deep consensus from everyone around certain core relationships and principles, then over time layer more and more complexity on top of that.
Right.
I feel a little differently than Richard. I really want to see where we can agree on some common definitions and relationships across all of LTSC, I think that would be very powerful. And I agree, Richard, that that's going to be challenging, which is why we got to kind of go slowly on that. But so we'll be back next week. IEEE, Jerry, Jim, it's a conceptual model for learning technology standards. And thanks, everyone. We'll see you then.
Take care.
I'll be sending out a link to the video after the meeting tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.